Hello, everybody. Preston Poulter here with Lords of Iron. I wanted to go over all the Battletech offerings from Catalyst. First, I want to say, big fan of Battletech going way back. I own the original Battletech, a game of armored combat box set, and I really appreciate that Catalyst Labs has reintroduced basically that game under that name, and this is definitely a wonderful homage to the original box set. It's got a nice clean rule book that's incorporates essentially it's very stripped down version of the rules of war, big rules tome, but everything in here is current. The weapons that all the mechs come with, and by the way, it's the mechs you remember, you get like the Thunderbolt and the Shadowhawk, the Locust, and all the weapons, they're all the original weapons, just the AC5, all the other autocannons. Well, you got to get the expanded rule supplement for all that good jazz. Got it new. It's shrink wrapped. By the way, and I offer bundles. For instance, I got a bundle for this one, Clan Wars, which I'll be going over a little bit later in this video, and you can get them both together under $100, free shipping. That's a deal. Better than Amazon. Check it out. In terms of, well, why should you get these boxes? The best value in there is the minis you get. The Battletech box set comes with 8 minis. You get the Locust, the Catapult, Thunderbolt, Griffin, Battlemaster, as well as cardboard counters and 2 nice fold-out battle maps and a couple of dice if you need those. Also, they got optional rules for like Mech Warriors and the Alpha Strike cards for all that stuff. It's a tremendous value just for the minis alone. If you actually buy the boxes of minis, they're $30 each suggested retail. So at 8 minis, the box set for a game of Armored Combat represents a discount off of buying the minis separately. So check it out. Now let's talk a bit about Clan Invasion. Again, being an old school Battletech person, I tend to look at the clan stuff with an eye of skepticism. When the game first started, the way we basically said, okay, these mechs should fight against those mechs and be relatively balanced was by tonnage. And then when we introduced all these new kind of clan and enhanced inner sphere stuff, in large part, I think the business decision from FASA was they wanted to get people off of the old mech designs that were in the original game of Armored Combat, because those came out of Japanese anime and the licensing issues were a little hairy. So I think they just offered, here, these mechs are better, they can do more, and that's why you should buy them and forget about the Warhammer, despite the fact it looks cool, and the Marauder and all that good jazz. But when they did, they didn't really give a way for us to balance the old mechs versus the new mechs. Tonnage was the guide we had at the time, and under the new rules, well, the new mechs could just do a lot more with the same tonnage, and how was that balanced? And then when it came to the clan, well, even worse, and it just became a mess. Fortunately, now we are in a relatively balanced environment. I am going to go over in detail the scenario that is presented in the box set, whereby the clan versus the inner sphere. And it's a lot of fun. I've played through it 4 times. The inner spheres won a couple of times. The clans won a couple of times. It's a balanced scenario. It doesn't take too long to play out. I am going to be hosting this scenario at the Long Con in Longview, Texas in mid-November, and I am making this video and sending it out to all the members because I'm going to go over the tactics of the scenario, having played through it 4 times now. And what I can say is, in terms of the win-loss record, the first 2 times the clan won, the second 2 times the inner sphere won. There's really tactics that I think the inner sphere needs to understand, or they're just going to get creamed by the fact that the clan has better weaponry. And I'm going to go over all those rules here in this video a little bit later on. But first, just let me talk about what you get in the Clan Invasion box set. Everybody loves the Mad Cat. It made the cover of the box. It's got the big missile racks and the extended range PPCs. It can melt you down at long range, or it's an Omni mech. You just swap out whatever weapon system you like. That's the way the clan works, and have a good time. So you get 7 minis, 2 of them being little elemental troops. And Battletech has always more or less offered the promise of kind of these mixed units where you get some mechs and some tanks and some infantry and air support. But they haven't exactly really delivered on it all that well. Clan Invasion is the only box set product where we're at least getting infantry in the form of these armored troopers. All in all, a good value. I feel the scenarios are a lot of fun. So, Clan Invasion, right at 50 bucks again, link down in the description if you want to get that product, which I recommend. Now, I want to start getting into the specific tactics of the scenario Worlds Collide, which is what's presented in the Clan Invasion rulebook as basically the scenario of the Inner Sphere versus a clan star. The way that the Inner Spheres have traditionally been organized is a lance represents 4 mechs, while for the clan, a star represents 5. So we have 2 lances from the Inner Sphere versus 4 clan mechs and 2 squads of elemental troopers. In terms of battle point value, the clan has a bit of an advantage at 10,000 and some change versus the Inner Sphere's 9,000 and some change. That is balanced out by Zellbrigen, aka the clan honor rules. I hope I'm not mispronouncing Zellbrigen. The scenario specifies that the clan is to follow the clan honor rules, which means their tactics have to be suboptimal. And that's really the key for the Inner Sphere. You need to capitalize on the fact that the clan's going to be fighting a bit suboptimally so that you can bring them down. Otherwise, if you more or less kind of follow along with their honor rules and each mech is fighting one other opponent, they're just going to slaughter you. Because these rules are so important, let's go over Zellbrigen. So, according to the rules as presented in the book, a challenge is issued during the weapons attack phase. And again, that comes down to initiative. And one of the key aspects is the clan issues a challenge when a mech goes, okay, I'm going to fire at that mech over there. That mech has been challenged. And then if that mech ignores the challenge, then they get a point of dishonor. And at the point that a Inner Sphere mech accumulates 3 points of dishonor, well, then anyone in the clan may now fire at that mech, and now it becomes more of a free-for-all. And you want to try and avoid that. You, as the Inner Sphere player, want to try and keep the clan so that each clan mech has to fight against one other opponent, and they're not concentrating their fire. That's the advantage of the Inner Sphere, is basically everyone can go, okay, I want to fire at that mech right there and bring it down. Now, that means that initiative becomes very important because a challenge is issued during the weapon attack phase. So if the Inner Sphere won initiative, well, that they would be first to declare weapons fire, at least for however many mechs that initiative would bring. And obviously, it's not dishonorable to fire on some clan mech if they haven't even been challenged yet. For instance, in this specific scenario, Worlds Collide, the Inner Sphere is bringing a recon lance of 2 locusts and 2 commandos, and a pretty heavy lance. We got a thunderbolt, a griffin, a shadowhawk, and a catapult. And the thunderbolt, it's a 7M, so it's all jazzed up, and it brings a lot of firepower. Its gunnery skill is 2. It can hit a lot of stuff pretty hard, and that's the mech that you think, okay, the clan is going to want to be challenging that one immediately. So if you're the Inner Sphere and you've won initiative, you should probably start by going, okay, the Thunderbolt's going to target that mech right there. And then when it's their turn, they can go, I've issued a challenge, and you don't even have to worry about how you're going to deal with that until next turn. The only conditions that allow for an Inner Sphere mech to refuse a challenge is if they're being challenged by a mech that is outside of its weight class. So let's go over the 4 mechs that the clan is bringing. We have 2 adders, which are 35 tons each sporting 2 LRM-20s. They're very fast, and as you can imagine, just these little mobile LRM-20 platforms. The advantage here, again, is that they can't focus fire. It can't be like the Mad Cat's going to melt this mech and these other 2 adders are going to bring 4 LRM-20s and you're just going to blow up the Thunderbolt. Again, Zellbrigen, they have to mix their targets. So the Mad Cat's firing at the Thunderbolt, and the Adder's firing at the Shadowhawk, and that Adder's firing at the Griffin, for instance. But if you're in the Griffin, which is 55 tons, and that Adder says, I am hitting you with my LRM-20s and you're in a challenge, because the Adder is in a different weight class, you as the Griffin can go, no, I'm going to refuse that challenge. Any mech that's outside of your weight class, you can refuse the challenge of. So if the Mad Cat is challenging a Locust, the Locust can go, no, Instead, you have to issue an alternate challenge as the Innersphere and go, I'm firing at that clan mech. Those are the rules that will allow you to refuse a challenge. Now, if you can't refuse a challenge, or you don't, and the challenge ensues, again, if you accumulate 3 different points of dishonor, all clan mechs will consider you a dishonorable opponent. Challenge rules no longer apply, and they can focus their fire at you. Once you've accepted a challenge, you don't want to accumulate 3 points of dishonor and thereby be deemed a dishonorable mech by which the clan can essentially all concentrate their fire on you. Now, how would you get a point of dishonor? A, you cannot move out of line of sight of the opposing mech. That's an act of dishonor. 2, you have to fire at least one weapon at the challenging mech that is within the appropriate firing arc and range. Meaning, if you're the Thunderbolt, you can't go, okay, I'm going to alpha strike this guy over here and fire my machine guns in response to the challenge at that mech that's more than 3 hexes away. That's cheesy. Can't do that. It has to be within the arc and appropriate range for at least one weapon. And 3, you cannot move outside of the firing range of all of your own weapons. So those are the 3 ways you accumulate dishonor points. The big one that comes up every turn is, did I fire at least one weapon that's within an appropriate range at the target? Now notice, this is within an appropriate range. If it's an impossible shot, then that's fine. So the Shadowhawk can be like, yeah, and I fired my SRM2 at that challenging mech that's 8 hexes away. I jumped, it ran. There's no way I'm going to hit. That doesn't matter. Even if it's beyond 12, whatever, it doesn't matter. As long as within the appropriate firing arc and range, you're good. Now, the rules of Zellbrigen also mean a clan mech may not engage in physical attacks. For whatever reason, that's considered in poor form. Although they make an exception if the Innersphere mech has already made a physical attack against them. Note, that is not dishonorable for the Innersphere to engage in physical attacks. They just consider that distasteful. So that's not a point of dishonor, but the clan cannot engage in physical attacks unless an Innersphere mech has already previously physically attacked them, and then they can only physically attack that one mech. So that's Zellbrigen. It's very important, as I'm going to go over when I start talking about appropriate tactics for this scenario. I wanted everyone to understand there are the rules. All right, let's go over elementals. There are 2 squads of them. They're fairly important to this fight. 1, elementals can start the scenario riding on an Omni-Mech. All of these clan mechs are Omni-Mechs, so take your pick. The way it goes is there's a squad of 5 elementals. 3 of them ride on the front torso, so left torso, center, and right, and then 2 of them ride on the rear torsos. If a particular location is hit on the mech where there's an elemental stationed, then you roll a die on a 5 or 6, it hits the elemental. Note that if you, for instance, roll Snake Eyes and go, ha ha, center torso possible critical, but then you roll a 5 or a 6, well, that's no longer center torso possible critical. Instead, the elemental takes the hit. There is no critical roll. Sorry. Although I, as referee, would say if you are able to do enough damage that it goes through the elemental entirely, then sure, why not? Go ahead and roll your critical hit. How much damage can an elemental take? 10 points. Just like hit points in Dungeons & Dragons, they are perfectly A-okay as long as they have 1 point remaining. But then when they go to 0, boom, kaput, that's it. They can either move 1 point walking on the ground, or they can jump up to 3. When they are firing, they do not suffer penalties from their own movement, meaning they just tend to jump everywhere because it makes them a little bit harder to hit. Also, when a mech is targeting a squad of elementals, you have to add 1 to your target roll because they're so small. There's a whole bunch of swarm rules about where they can climb on opposing mechs. I don't want to get into all that. It doesn't really happen that often. For the most part, the fact that elementals can't really move that fast on their own makes them really good if, for instance, you blew up the leg of an opposing mech. It's not really going anywhere. You can drop your squad of elementals, let them finish it off while you go on and fire someone else. One other very important rule: while an elemental is on a given torso location, you can't fire any weapons from that location, meaning you should not put a squad of elementals on a Mad Cat, because then it can't fire those big LRM-20s. The adders, on the other hand, ideal choices, as is the Black Hawk, Nova, Prime, whatever, because both of those mechs have all their weapons and arms. A squad of elementals can disembark from an Omni-Mech at the end of that Omni-Mech's move, but they may not fire their weapons on that round. So they're basically a free target the round they disembark. They can also mount onto an Omni-Mech again at the end of that Omni-Mech's move. So an Omni-Mech would have to either be standing in a square and say, I'm not going to move, or move into a square and saying, my move is done. Then the elementals could climb back on. Each elemental soldier is considered to have an SRM 2-pack, so at any point you can go, okay, my squad of elementals will fire their SRM pack. Everybody in an elemental squad has to fire on the same target, and you just roll to hit. Again, just like any old SRM, they have their own gunnery skill, but since there are 5 of them, you roll like it's an LRM5. You roll on the 5 cluster table and see how many SRMs hit the target. They have an SRM 2-pack, so they can do that twice. Each elemental also has a small laser. Those never run out of ammo, and it gets pretty rude if you're right next to an elemental and they fire 5 SRMs and 5 small lasers at you. And again, you roll to hit with a small laser. How many hit the target you roll on the cluster table? So if an elemental squad hits you with their small lasers, most likely you're going to get hit with 3, because that's the median value right there in the middle of the bell curve on that cluster chart. All right, those are most of the rules of elementals. There's no Zellbrigen. You don't have to worry about honor when it comes to these little guys, but they are an important and significant part of this fight, so you do at least need to familiarize yourself with how they work. All right, the last bit of special rules you need to familiarize yourself for the Worlds Collide scenario. This scenario uses formation rules. What are those? Those are special rules you might not have ever seen before, and they certainly shake up play quite a bit. The entire clan formation is considered a battle star. For fans of Battlestar Galactica, enjoy. What does this mean? This means they get 6 rerolls for either an attack roll or a piloting check. I'm going to give out 6 pieces of candy at the start of the scenario. Every time you use this ability, eat a piece of candy. Easy way to keep track of it. You must accept the second roll, so you can't just do 6 rerolls on one time. You get 6 separate rerolls for either a weapon attack roll or piloting skill roll. There you go. Fairly simple, but a powerful ability. For the inner sphere, there are 2 formations, one for each lance. For that lance of light mechs, that is designated as a recon lance. What on earth does that mean? Well, this ability is pretty cool. Check it out. Everyone in the recon lance is considered a maneuvering ace, meaning they may freely move into a hex which is neither directly in front of it or directly to the back of it. So they can move into these lateral hexes at the cost of 1 extra movement point. So if you're standing in the middle of a completely clear field, it will cost 1 movement point to move forward, but for the cost of 2 movement points, you can move laterally or back laterally without changing your facing. That's a great ability. And when you got a Locust, which can move 12 hexes, you can imagine that thing can just tear across the board. The Lance of Heavies for the Inner Sphere is considered an Assault Lance, which, oh boy, this rule. Check it out. I would say the key to the Inner Sphere beating the clan in this scenario relies on using the Zellbrigen rules to your advantage and using the rules for being a command lance. What does that mean? All right, so before play even starts, you need to choose 2 mechs. I recommend the Thunderbolt and the Catapult as possessing the combat intuition ability. In addition, as long as the commanding mech, which I'm going to say is the Thunderbolt, is still around, you get 1 free reroll on initiative. During the end phase of a round, you can declare that you are using combat intuition. That mech warrior immediately takes a point of damage, which is going to prompt a consciousness roll. Hopefully it's not going to be an anticlimactic result to your combat intuition, but should you survive during the next round, you either may A, move at the absolute end of the initiative, or B, check out this ability. When activated during the movement phase during initiative order, the combat intuition ability may move declare fire, resolve weapons fire, and then resolve physical attacks all during the movement phase in that order, even against a mech that hasn't moved yet on the opposing side. And in such cases, that mech is considering not to have moved, meaning they move 0, so they're pretty easy to hit. During one scenario where I was playing through this, the Thunderbolt ran up on the cliff right next to the Mad Cat and ended up kicking its head off. Or you can run around behind it, alpha strike it in the back. It's pretty handy when your opponent has a movement value of 0. And of course, if they return fire, why does it even matter? You already got everything, including physical attacks. That is an absolute powerhouse ability. Inner Sphere needs to use that to its advantage. All right, so those are all the optional. So those are all the rules you're going to need to familiarize yourself in order to play this scenario. Now let's go through the specific tactics of Worlds Collide. The scenario prescribes you have Barren Lands 1 and Rolling Hills 2. The Inner Sphere is coming in on the west. The clan's coming in on the east. The clan is so fast, they're obviously going to be kind of moving through, and they will come out usually in those 4 different channels. You've got kind of 2 channels north and south where you're going around the hills, and 2 channels where you're going through the hills. And you, as the Inner Sphere player, just need to know this is where the fight is going to come down. It's going to be right there. Now, I've found with the Inner Sphere, what you want to do, you want to kind of line up like they used to do in muskets, where they just got everybody in a line and just kind of charge, all right? The scenarios where the Inner Sphere didn't do well, it more or less said, okay, well, the clan mechs are over there. We're going to hide behind cover because there's only so many cover places to get, right? So if the clan's going to run and get behind cover and the Inner Sphere is going to get behind cover, you're going to end up in these situations where 1 or 2 Inner Sphere mechs are firing at one clan mech, and the clan with their superior firepower is just going to wear you down over time, and the Inner Sphere loses. The Inner Sphere needs to force a scenario by which they can everybody fire at one guy, and there's really not. And here's where the honor rules come to your advantage. If everyone just storms right down the middle of the field, say there's 2 clan mechs there in the middle, 2 clan mechs there on the edges, the 2 clan mechs on the edges often will have a very difficult shot hitting the guys in the middle because of all this terrain. And the 2 guys in the middle can't even focus their fire on the same mech. They have to pick different mechs. These mechs are fairly tough for the Inner Sphere. You know, you got the Thunderbolt and the Catapult and the Shadowhawk and all that. So it's going to take the clan a while to wear you down. Meanwhile, you as the Inner Sphere get to focus your fire on one target. Do your best to fire the occasional weapon towards whatever mech happens to be challenging you. But the goal for the Inner Sphere is to focus fire, to use your combat initiative advantage to finish off key opponents before they even get to fire back at you. It's pretty cool, and that's, in my opinion, what the whole scenario comes down to. For the clan player, do your best, stay mobile. With this terrain, there will often be a situation where maybe you set up somebody in a great firing position, but everybody in the Inner Sphere is running towards this other one clan target to attack it, and then the clan guy on the edge of the board doesn't really have a shot. Of course, LRM-20s are available for lots of people, so indirect fire is always an option. For the Inner Sphere, that Recon Lance packs a lot of punch with those commandos, particularly if they can maneuver around behind. So they move so fast. I usually just send the Recon Lance just kind of increasingly around to the back. You've got a Locust mounted with 2 LRM-5s. It does perfectly fine just sniping at people's back on essentially the east side of this board. Those are the tactics. Big stompy robots. It's an exciting scenario. I think it's a lot of fun. I enjoy seeing everybody at LongCon. This has been Preston Poulter with Lords of Iron, thanking everyone so much for your viewership. Take care.